Chapter 2, Valuing and Devaluing Physical Pain. With so much to do for the physical pains we feel, is there really any excuse to experience pain at all? Why not medicate to the eyeballs and feel no pain ever? First, simply not realistic. Total relief from pain really requires unconsciousness. Total prevention of pain requires isolation from the world, weightlessness, disembodiment. By the time we're treating pain, it's typically already settled in. Some pain is inevitable. Would a life completely free of pain even have any meaning? Short of masochism, for our purposes, seeking out pain for the purposes of pleasure, people seek out and engage with pain quite frequently. I live in Colorado, consistently one of the fittest, if not the fittest state in the Union. We're intensely dog friendly, have hiking and biking trails all over the place, mountains to climb, gyms on every street corner. Get up around dawn on any Colorado morning and one can see runners and cyclists on the streets in all weather. In the winter, the runners are bundled in Arctic fleece, hands covered, faces and ears covered, taking measured paces, careful of ice. In the summer, the men are shirtless and the women down to halter tops. Spring and fall are maybe the best seasons for outdoor activities here, with mild temperatures at all hours. I used to run gamely and with no particular talent. It has always been difficult for me due to asthma, but as a younger man, I endured, pushed through. I also swam poorly, circuit trained, and more recently did aerobics and high impact classes. As little as 5 years ago, I could do handstand push ups. When I hit 40, though, um, I'm reading an old book. That's long history now. When I hit 40, though, the pain of exercise became too much. The fact that I was quickly losing muscle mass and endurance despite increasing my activity, not really much incentive to continue. Nowadays, I avoid exercise to some cost. Asthma tends to keep me pretty sedentary. Even a short run leaves me wheezing for half a day. The trouble is, the less I exercise, the less exercise it takes to make me wheeze. Lately, I'm on the verge of wheezing starting from rest. Moreover, running hurts. It hurts my legs, knees, shins, and back. But not running over time becomes nearly as painful. Backaches in particular result from my sedentary lifestyle. Therefore, is there any real sense in avoiding the pain of exercise? Is this not simply a system of pay me now or pay me later? I find runners to be a strange breed of people, especially those who enjoy going long distances. They often run with pain, carefully tabling the experience of pain, pushing through it or past it. They manage sometimes intense discomfort in order to run far enough to break through the wall. The point in the run where they feel they can go no further, but they do go further, coming into a second wind. I barely have a first wind. There are numerous stories of runners finishing races with broken legs. For example, Krista Duchene at a Canadian half marathon in 2014, or Manteo Mitchell in the 4x400 Olympic relay race in 2012. As Jacqueline Simon Gunn says in her interesting and provocative book, Bear, Psychotherapy Stripped, my running coach, Chantal, had me performing innumerable track workouts in preparation for my long distance road races. They were painful, and the pain was different than what I experienced during endurance training and longer races. And the ability to stay relaxed and focused in the face of pain and exhaustion is essential to being a successful long distance runner. This may not seem like much fun, but the sense of strength and power that comes from running is like nothing else I've ever experienced. For me, this is the psychological component of the runner's high. When the pain seems most intense and you really want to stop, somewhere you find the strength to keep going. Continuing in the face of such a rigorous effort endows you with all the power you'll need to push on. This, then, for me at least, supplies an inner strength that is needed to move past the pain and into a sort of spiritual transcendence. End quote. This is overcoming pain as a discipline. The runner knows something the rest of us are busy forgetting. To get strong, you have to go on until you're uncomfortable and then go on a while longer. It is in that place where discomfort happens, but activity is still possible, that growth and development happen. Whatever exercise you choose, this is true. If you stop because you're tired or a little bit uncomfortable, the exercise is wasted. You never get better at the exercise you're doing. You must slightly exceed your limits each time, and this is an act of will, of discipline. This requires knowing about pain and pushing through it. Without the knowledge of pain, this exercise becomes dangerous, enabling the runner or cyclist or swimmer to exceed their limits to the point of serious injury or death. Thus, the distance runner has to know they have pain or discomfort, measure whether it's serious enough to attend to, and table the awareness of such pain for the good of the activity. Jane Fonda popularized the phrase "no pain, no gain" in her 1980s workout videos. She's talking exactly about going beyond one's current limits and staying there long enough for the body to grow and strengthen, for the mind to become more disciplined. After a good workout at the gym, one expects to be at least a little sore the following day, or after 2 days. Rather than complain about such pain, we might take it as a sign that we did something good. We used muscles we had not been using before, got a little stronger. The modern equivalent of "no pain, no gain" is perhaps the phrase "pain is weakness leaving the body." We hear it from drill instructors, extreme fitness instructors, and so on. Perhaps a more appropriate and mainstream approach to pain and exercise comes from yoga. Especially for beginners, yoga can be uncomfortable to the extreme. Holding the poses requires strength from muscles we're not at all accustomed to using. We ache, wobble, burn, and fail. The yoga instructor asks the students to endure what initially seems like torment. Pain is not at all weakness leaving the body. Pain is a sign that what we're doing is unfamiliar, that we need more practice. It is not our reward following a session. Following yoga, many or most people report feeling relaxed, loose, not aching or in pain at all, as one would expect from a heavy weightlifting or running or swimming session. Yoga asks of us that we stay with the pain, listen to it, stay present to it. If the pose hurts because we're twisting or stretching things beyond our limits, we're instructed to back away and come back, until those limits change. There are beginner, intermediate, and advanced versions of most poses, and when one becomes easy, it's no longer as helpful. We're invited to move to the more difficult pose. As with running, the person engaged in yoga does not stop their exercise over a little discomfort. Indeed, some of the practice centers on knowing that the discomfort we feel is, like all things, impermanent. It hurts now, and soon it will not hurt anymore. It burns now, and tomorrow I will be stronger. I feel weak in this moment, and in one more minute I can relax. At the end of the session, it is typical to feel accomplishment, relaxation, and increased ability. A little used alternative pain treatment involves giving the patient chemicals that prevent them from forming memories of their experience. Thus, a month of excruciating pain recovering from a full body burn is forgotten, leaves no footprints on the person's experiences. The pain cannot be prevented, but the trauma can. Trauma requires memory. With no memory of the pain is literally impermanent. It never happened. This idea at time of writing is still experimental. Other examples can be found outside of fitness. Piercings and tattoos are increasingly common and accepted. Many US Americans have at least one body modification other than a simple earring. Multiple piercings are ubiquitous. Earhole enlargement is a time of writing more common every day. People pierce their noses, put barbells through their noses, pierce nipples and navels and genitalia, have pins in every conceivable part of their bodies. Tattoos, once crude and rare, are everywhere. My sister is a master tattoo artist doing what are called watercolor tattoos, meaning they appear in quality like a watercolor painting. They have intense, vivid color and sometimes photorealistic artwork. Whenever I see a photograph of some of the work she's done, I'm filled with awe and reverence. Art is hard enough on paper or canvas, never mind the pressures involved with permanently altering another person's body. Not only are more people getting higher quality tattoo work, the tattoos are often large, elaborate, and on sensitive parts of the body. My sister reports that the process of getting tattooed can be cathartic for some people. They come in with a piece they want done that has emotional significance, the name or face of a person who has died, a place or verse of some significance. She does a design for them that expresses what they need expressed in a way they could not manage for themselves. Then, with their approval, she puts that onto them. The process is a little painful. I sat through this a few years ago during graduate school when I was losing faith in my ability to complete the program. I needed something that spoke of inner strength, resilience, so I did a design and sat for a session. The pain is more irritating typically than agonizing, but for large pieces it can drag on, especially when they're going over the same thing over and over again. Really test the subject's coping skills and patience and temper. Recently, I went to see my sister in Philadelphia. Part of the visit was to collect a piece of her art. Since her art goes under the skin, this meant sitting in the chair for 6 hours while I went through this with her. The results are spectacular and special to me. Again, here we are. That's what I got. Abraham Martin and John. And the suffering was a revelation. I eschewed any numbing agent. The first passes of the needle weren't bad. By the end, though, my sister was going over areas already covered multiple times, already swollen and inflamed. At the end of the session, we come away with this thing that's intensely personal, meaningful, and we have suffered for it. Thank our artist for having helped us suffer for it. Obviously, we are not discussing just a Tweety bird on one's back or a Tasmanian devil on the tailbone, but just the pieces of personal meaning. And at the end of these, something of grief or loss might have been shifted, moved, not eliminated, but changed. Sometimes it's a big piece that's done for the sake of art, and the person takes as much pride in having sat through, say, a full bodysuit in the Japanese style as if they had completed a marathon. It takes some strength and resolution to tolerate the process, hour after hour, day after day, until such a thing is done. The act of getting and giving that tattoo is a partnership, an intimate act. Working with adults who experience developmental disabilities, I was often put into intimate circumstances with them, doing their hair, putting their makeup on for them, doing their lipstick, helping with bathing and drying and toothbrushing and toileting and period care. I can therefore imagine how intimate it might be to tattoo a private area of someone's body, a place they do not typically show strangers, to sit in their body space, talk to them about what meaning the work has to them, be with them as they work on their part of the partnership, taking it in stillness and with good grace. And they must trust you, implicitly trust you as you hurt them, mark them, brand them. Imagine the possibilities for abuses or mistakes. And tattoo artists do their level best to honor all that trust and all of that intimacy. Another activity in the body modification tradition, rarely undertaken, is called suspension. In this practice, a person is lifted from the ground by hooks or pins through their flesh. To the average person, this sounds horrifying. For the person who chooses to undertake this practice, it's akin to a spiritual experience, an act of devotion and determination. We will revisit this practice and the practice of crucifixion reenactment in the final chapter of the book. Before we step off this line of reasoning, though, consider one more act of voluntary pain: childbirth and labor. It's completely possible these days to have a voluntary cesarean section under anesthesia, skip the whole process of vaginal delivery. It's just as possible to get a spinal block and plenty of painkillers. Some mothers, though, choose to go through natural childbirth. This can be seen without too much imagination as an act of devotion. It's a devotion to the act of birth and the act of mothering that will take place through the indefinite future. To voluntarily experience pain for someone else, someone as yet unformed, has some pretty serious implications. Such mothers use non-medical means to lessen the pain of delivery. The series of breathing exercises called Lamaze, after their inventor, helps the mother to focus, to concentrate, and endure the most uncomfortable parts of the labor process. Any number of aids might be used, most notably gravity. Rather than lie flat in bed as advised by doctors, the mother might more sensibly crouch or squat, so that the downward tendency of objects can assist in the delivery. Walking, a warm bath, even sexual intercourse can all help move the process variously along. Increasingly, aspects of the natural childbirth tradition are finding their way into the medicalized process. Here we have an encounter with physical pain as something that is normal, natural, to be expected. And that adds meaning to the life of the person doing the encountering. Next, we have pain as pleasure and the masochism mentioned earlier in the chapter. Bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism, BDSM, are not quite mainstream parts of our culture, but have been approaching from the fringes for decades. Betty Page is famous for being part of the underground sex, fetish, fantasy industry of bygone years. This aspect of her life and career highlighted by a capable Gretchen Mol in the feature film of her life. We can think of at least two levels of kink here: ordinary tame couples seeking to spice up their sex lives, in other words, dabblers, and those who support a lucrative industry around kink. These are the serious people, fetishists and connoisseurs of experience whose practice takes up significant portions of their lives. If it is difficult to find out about the sex lives of people who we would consider ordinary, imagine the complexity of trying to find out about the practices of people who have for decades been labeled deviant. The Betty Page story is not ultimately a happy one. It involves some degradation, damaged self-esteem, maybe worse. But a story told to and by mainstream America must be taken with ample grains of salt. Sexual kink has a number of possible explanations. One of the simplest, and therefore convincing, is the idea that sex is inherently very rewarding for humans, explaining why there are over 7 billion of us crawling over the planet, more like 8 billion now, with projections exceeding 10 billion in my probable lifetime. If something immediately precedes sex, such as the smell of rubber, or the smell of pine sol, or the feeling of pain, then we learn to expect sex following those stimuli again in the future. Ivan Pavlov ably demonstrated the concept with dogs, bells preceding food rather than kink preceding sex. And now the theory is a mainstay of psychology. There is, of course, little to no empirical support for the theory taken to this level. People who engage in masochistic practices, as mentioned before, tend to be quite shy about answering questions or appearing in places where their private behavior is observable. Suffice to say that the experience of pain is not always about sexual gratification. It is perhaps just as likely to be about submission to another person, and is unlikely to take place in the presence of a sadist. Additionally, the dominant and subservient partners are sometimes able to switch roles. It would take a certain sympathy for the person experiencing pain to to favor them with the pain they desire, but also respect the boundaries established in the relationship, the rules of engagement, if you like. An old joke of dubious origin suggests a relationship between a sadist and a masochist. Hurt me, said the masochist, and the sadist said, no. There probably is not really such a thing as a masochist as described by society. However, there probably are people who seek out and enjoy certain kinds of pain for a number of reasons. I would enjoy reading some good qualitative studies on the subject. As I teach at the time of writing at a graduate school that endorses qualitative study, please do construe this as a hint to my students, a suggestion for a dissertation idea. Outside the realm of sex and so called kink, another class of people inflict pain on themselves. Cutters, as you would think, cut themselves. This sometimes results in accidental suicide. The purpose of cutting is not, however, such serious self-harm. More or less rarely, the behavior is more or less rarely the behavior is an attention-seeking one, called parasuicidal behavior, and can be very difficult to treat. But for many cutters, the activity is secret and even shameful. They cut parts of the body unlikely to be seen and reported by other people, such as the inner thigh, or wear long clothing to conceal the injuries. This behavior might serve a number of purposes, either individually or all at once. Pain releases endorphins. If you recall, these are the body's natural painkillers. Cutting then releases chemicals similar to morphine. This can help deaden other sorts of pain. Paradoxically, the person hurts theirself to feel better. The other sorts of pain they seek to deaden are likely to be emotional and therefore invisible. Emotional pain is processed in the same area of the brain as physical pain, and emotional pain responds to analgesics. Tylenol, in other words, does something for depression. People do things because of a lack of great opportunities. Cutting is a rational choice. In this light, consider what sort of emotional pain might be worse than the physical pain of slicing the skin with a sharp blade. Another reason for cutting is the simple sight of blood. Some people experience a sense of depersonalization, of not feeling like they're a person in a body in the world. Seeing the flow of their own blood can restore them to some of that sense that they're embodied and that they're real and that they matter. Yet another possible reason is the control and discipline it takes to cut oneself. If the person feels especially as though they have little or no control over themselves or their environment, cutting can be one of the last measures of control the person can demonstrate. Humans need quite strongly this sense that we are in charge of things, that events do not happen at random, that our choices matter. We choose suicide or cutting or any number of other behaviors over that feeling of chaos. Finally, at least for this chapter of the book, the pain itself may be of value. Again, for a person feeling lost and disconnected, the experience of pain can serve to ground them in their body and experience, or to distract from more serious troubles over which they have no control. If all of this seems strange, consider some of the ways you yourself might assert control over your environment in order to feel less of the chaos that surrounds our lives in these modern times. Perhaps you check your email or social media pages more than once daily, eager to not miss any communications, to control the rate and pace of your communications. Maybe you have a chair in your home where nobody else is allowed to sit, or you insist on having possession of the TV remote. For years, I worked at the state psychiatric hospital. The job largely consisted of being still and listening to patients or serving meals. However, there was always a chance that a patient would become violent. As I worked on the unit dedicated to patients with violent histories, the danger was especially high enough that when people asked my profession, I would reply, I get punched in the face so you don't have to. Good management on our unit kept the violence level very low. Knowing your patients, keeping general excitement down, intervening early before things escalate too high, all help stop violence before it starts. Some problems included high rates of turnover and burnout. We often worked with substitute staff who did not know the patients. A result was that even if I managed my unit perfectly, keeping everyone healthy and productive and calm, other units might not, for any number of reasons, be well managed. And when there was violence, someone would pull the alarm and everyone available was expected to come running. This, I imagine, is much the way a firefighter lives, doing their moment to moment activities, but always alert for that alarm that could go off at any time or no time. That could signify something simple like a choking victim or a catastrophe like the wildfires that have swept around the edges of my city the last few years. Naturally, I had ways to defray this feeling of uncontrol. Little things I did that gave me the illusion of control. For example, only certain numbers were acceptable on the volume dial of the radio when I drove to and from work: 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, 12, and 20. 20 was much too loud, and 12 sometimes too soft, but I was attached to these numbers. On the unit, there were floor tiles that had lines that were arranged alternating. This tile front to back, this tile left to right. I would step only on the tiles that matched my direction of travel. Counting books by fives on bookshelves was soothing. Of course, having regimented times for things to happen was soothing, and the list goes on. The truth is, we all do little things to assert and feel control. This might be more or less appropriate depending how much actual control one has over one's life and affairs. Perhaps not coincidentally, cutting tends to be most prevalent in young women, especially but far from exclusively teenagers. Emotions are high, inhibition is low, and life is ordered by sometimes arbitrary moral and social standards as well as one's own parents. Throw in a few more stressors, a little more chaos, and we can see the need to assert some kind of control might be intense. Because of the time and place in which we live, we imagine we can avoid pain all the time or can annihilate pain completely. We believe pain is something that can and should be annihilated on contact. But this is an illusion. The methods we have for pain reduction are just that. They can help us eliminate minor pains and reduce major ones, but for the most part, we must encounter pain prior to working on its elimination. What do we lose by our aggressive attitudes toward pain? Is it conceivable that the experience of pain inures us in some way to pain? That refusing to encounter even a little bit of pain or discomfort causes us to be more alert for pain when it comes along, and therefore to experience it as worse than it is. For most of human history, we have had to simply acclimate to the discomforts endemic to our environments. Too hot or too cold, aching from labors or arthritis, bruised or wounded or hungry. Intolerance of discomfort leaves us always seeking comfort, the easiest road, rest and relaxation. It leaves us satisfying every urge, feeling entitled to life without a hint of hunger. Some of life's satisfactions come from deprivation, from learning not to eat every time we feel nervous or unhappy or thirsty, to eat healthy things rather than the things evolution has programmed us to poison ourselves with, from seeking out challenges, physical challenges like strenuous exercise, the testing of one's limits, sitting for a tattoo, or practicing an extra hour at your sport of choice or your musical instrument. Take learning the guitar, for example, particularly the acoustic guitar. Developing the calluses on your fret fingers takes time. The enthusiastic learner can easily make their fingers bleed through excessive practice. The pain can be intense and prolonged. The rewards, though, are the ability to communicate through music, to create beauty. Playing my guitar has at times served as a comfort in difficult times, a means of tightening relationships with others who played, but were otherwise different from me, a means of shouting across the gap that separates you from me. My experience of autism has left this at times the only effective way I've had of expressing emotions safely, and doing so in public has helped me change some elementary elements of my character. What if I had shied away from the pain when I was 15, when I bought my first guitar after saving my allowance for a whole year? I experienced more than a little sensory overload in those days, felt the sounds in my ears so intensely I had to sit in the hallway for some classes as the sound of my teacher's voice was too painful. But I loved my guitar, put up with all the pain, and eventually became a distinctly mediocre player. Moreover, evolutionary psychology makes no effort I'm aware of to discuss pain in terms of value added beyond simple learning. Perhaps because the discipline grew to awareness in a time in which comfort and painlessness were already entrenched in our way of life. We can get only so far attempting to explain the world in terms of conditioning and genes and biology. Eventually, we have to take a look at the fact that we also evolved to hold values dear. We evolved to be caring, empathetic, moral even, and we evolved to find meaning in events, to be shaped by them. What if pain is the cost of admission, and the show is life itself? One thing I know about people is they like to take arguments to their most extreme form and ridicule them. This form of contrariness is called the argument to the absurd, or sometimes a straw man argument. For example, the most common arguments about against evolution involve boiling the theory down to an easily dismissed absurdity. If we all evolved from chimpanzees, why are there still chimpanzees? Of course, no biologist ever seriously contended we evolved from chimpanzees, rather that we share a common ancestor, or that all more primitive forms die when a more advanced form arises. So for some readers, the instinct might be to wonder if I'm advocating we eliminate all measures of pain moderation and control, and the answer to that question is a resounding no. It is doubtful that returning to an age before analgesics, sedatives, and anesthetics would be a return to a more enlightened age or an age of greater spiritual death. It would just entail more suffering. Rather, I advocate that we engage with our modern luxuries and conveniences mindfully and with some caution about how they affect our view of the world. It is difficult to have a great deal of empathy for hungry people if we never allow ourselves to experience hunger, for example, or at least have gratitude for the plenty in our pantry. It might be more difficult to have empathy for the poor. It might be more difficult to imagine the suffering in places where medicine is still quite crude, and it is possible that our pain-free lives of comfort make us overly demanding. Spend any time at all in food service work, waiting on people, making coffee drinks, and so on. You'll quickly notice how demanding people are. Rarely will anyone use the common words of courtesy, please, thank you, if it's no trouble. During some time in China, I wanted to learn how to speak some of the language, even though the attempt was hampered by the fact that everyone had come from different parts of China where the language is different. Now, I think there are some things you need to be able to say in every language, like thank you, where's the bathroom, I'm sorry, coffee, and please. Most of these are quite easy. Asking for the toilet is especially so. You use the words for wash hands, and even if you mangle those words, you make the universal hand washing gesture. Everyone knows what you mean. You go in the direction they point until you get lost, then ask the next person and they point, and eventually you get where you're going, no problem. The most confusing part of learning, though, is asking how to say please. There really is not an equivalent word in Chinese. You have to say if it's no trouble, and you sound quite strange. No one ever seems to wonder if their servers, waiters, and so on might be put out by their requests. I prefer to be more polite than necessary, in large part because I've been subjected to the demands of impolite people who want their coffee and view me as the machine that makes it. So, learning all of this was a big surprise to me. No word for please? How unusual. But how often do we actually use these words, except to teach them to children? Having your children say please and thank you, sir and ma'am, can be seen as nostalgia for more polite ages in society, and even as hypocrisy, ex- except to the extent that we use such words ourselves. Is it our age of comfort and painlessness that makes us so impolite, so willing to not only skip manners, but to call out bad service in a demeaning and public way? Can we really not tolerate the worker at the fast food restaurant forgetting to put on or leave off cheese in our sandwich, or that the coffee we ordered comes out behind the order of the person behind us? Is our tolerance for discomforts really so low? Maybe when we have a headache, it really is all right to take a Tylenol or a Bear or whatever, and when we do so, perhaps it bears thinking about. Not having this headache is a luxury for which I am grateful. That headache is your due in life, a natural consequence of being a flesh and blood creature with anatomy and stress and whatever else is going on in your context. The painkiller is a way out that can entitle you to pain free luxury, or it can help you mindfully engage with more significant, more important issues in your life. There might be times when physical pain has a meaning, and that meaning is important enough that the pain is not really burdensome. Childbirth, as mentioned before, might be one such event. In my life, there has been more than one, and I'd like to share a story here. About 15 years ago, I worked with adults with developmental disabilities. I went into their homes where about four people pooled their money for rent and services. My job was to help these people live as near to normal lives as possible, doing what they could not do for themselves and assisting them to do whatever they could do with assistance. Because I had a strong back and a high tolerance for frustration, I usually drew the most disabled clients to work with. One man in particular has been a role model of mine since I met him. He could say maybe 5 or 6 words in total and was thought to have the mind of an infant or toddler. I've always thought it unseemly to compare adults who experience developmental disabilities to children. No toddler could have had the experience this middle aged man had, or could have experienced puberty or had the rights to autonomy that we struggled every day to protect. This man was a role model for me because he loved me without condition. He was always happy to see me, greeted me warmly, wanted body contact. He tried to please me, sat with me if I was sad, accepted all the help I could offer, never seemed to be down or angry or unhappy himself. I tried to earn the trust that he gave freely. I found out after a few years' association that this man had experienced abuse. Virtually all people of disability of his generation had. Abuse was so endemic to the community that we proceeded on the assumption that all of our clients experienced post-traumatic stress. This man, though, never gave any signs that this might be true. A previous caregiver had punished him for his incontinence. His parents confided the hired hand had been an alcoholic, not a great person, but all they could afford. Punishment usually meant hitting, slapping, spanking as though the man were a small child. I've heard that spanking children might be the last socially accepted form of domestic violence, and that disturbs me. But on this occasion, he was drunk, and the incontinence happened in his car. He slammed my friend's hand in a car door, resulting in the loss of a digit on that hand. I've always envied his ability to trust and love people. Far worse happened to him than to me, but I could never emulate his trust and unconditional love, not even now. But I try. This client eventually started to experience recurring and chronic pneumonia. He'd always needed help to walk around, a hand on his belt to help him balance. But now his legs began to weaken. He needed support, needed to borrow our strength and not just our balance. But people were busy. This was a high needs house, and we were underpaid, understaffed, underappreciated. It was easier for staff to keep him sitting still, or later, lying in bed, than it was to help him move around. This became circular. The more he was immobile, the more he was pneumonic, and the more he had pneumonia, the weaker he became, the less able or even eager to move around. On my shifts, though, I refused to watch him die this way, and he was dying inch by inch, day by day. I got him up, I got him walking, supporting him with my own strength. I was young, strong, had faith in my own strength, the way young people do. While he weakened, while the others let him weaken, I kept him going as long as I could. At the end of a few days of this, my back started to hurt. I persisted. What's a little pain compared to a life? Especially the life of a friend. As the days turned to weeks and the pain grew and settled in and became seemingly a part of daily life, I went to the doctor. They found nothing wrong. I somewhat distrust doctors these days because they never find anything wrong they can help with and charge rather a lot of money for their uncertainty. But the pain persisted. My work with this client ended. He might be alive today, but I doubt it. I was reassigned, eventually quit that job to move back to Colorado, and that was all a long time ago now. My back improved a little. I was able to exercise after a while, so long as I did not work too hard on those back muscles. In graduate school, long hours sitting and probably some psychological factors caused that old injury to pain me very badly. And when I was in a lot of pain, I was not nice to people. But later I learned to value the pain. Once I saw what that pain meant, it both receded, bothering me only occasionally now, and became more tolerable. The pain is a natural consequence of the work I did, the effort I expended to help my friend live as long as he could and as well as he could. It represents a struggle against meaningless death, against death by apathy, and it represents love in the best way I've ever been able to feel it. So when my back hurts, I think about what it means. The pain means I loved my friend and loved him as well as anyone could. The pain honors him. It is hard for the pain to cause much suffering, given what it means to me. So, in a way, I'm grateful for it. I don't enjoy the pain by any means, especially when it wakes me in the night, but I do not suffer with it. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Viktor Frankl made a career doing little else but elaborating on this theme, and if that sounds dismissive, bear in mind he elaborated it by surviving the Nazi death camps and emerging with his dignity intact and his morality and his sense of purpose. Physical pain is mere irritation, or even a badge of honor if we bear the pain for a purpose, a valued purpose. It's pain to no purpose that causes suffering.